All right. I'd like to introduce Adam, and he'll tell us more about his role at Malwarebytes. Malwarebytes is a platinum sponsor. We're very happy to have had them a sponsor from the very beginning. Um, you know, they've been a real supporter of this event and information sharing and community building. Um, I'll just let you take this away, Adam. If
All right. You see my screen all right?
It's coming up. There we go.
All right, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, John. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. My name's Adam Kujawa, and this is the State of Ransomware Survival Guide to Living in a Ransom World. As mentioned, Adam Kujawa, I've been a security evangelist for Malwarebytes for almost 10 years, also worked as their director of threat intel and a lot of other roles. My primary responsibility at the company now is to research threats, share information, like in cases like this, and empower our own teams to make sure that we're, looking at the right stuff. So let's go ahead and jump into it. First, we're going to talk about the current state of ransomware, where it's at right now. And this should all be familiar to y'all, I hope, because it's been in the news like crazy. So first, I want to talk about double extortion. Criminals using ransomware over the last year have actually started stealing data as well as encrypting it, then threatening to release or sell the data online if a ransom isn't actually paid. There's no guarantee that stolen data is deleted and not leaked anyway, nor is there any guarantee that the criminals won't come back and make sure that make the same threats again, trying to get more money. Ransomware as a service is a huge problem. It's one of the biggest reasons that ransomware right now is so bad today. This refers to a marketplace offering of custom developed, deployed, or managed ransomware families that criminals can purchase and use in their own attacks without needing the know-how of creating these things. This increase in the amount of competition between ransomware creators led to more sophisticated, dangerous, and powerful malware being developed and then sold on the darknet. In addition to ransomware, there are services that create backdoors, provide access into an already compromised network, spread threats via phishing emails or drive-by exploits, cryptors, money launderers, you name it. And so over the last year, we've seen an alarming increase in the use of hacking tools created for the purpose of penetration testing. They're being used to infiltrate and quickly compromise corporate networks. A big example of this is the platform Cobalt Strike, which hopefully many of you are familiar with. It was created originally as a tool to help find vulnerabilities in a network for professional penetration testers, but older versions have been seen being used or modified by criminals and deployed in real-world attacks, and utilizing those same tools that we use to help protect ourselves against us. Not all is bad, though. Law enforcement globally has taken very large steps in bringing down high-profile ransomware groups. At least 3 popular ransomware families of 2021 have vanished because of law enforcement threat or direct action, such as arrests. However, being able to target the entire ransomware or cybercrime industry is really a tall order and is unlikely to happen from a handful of takedowns. And finally, multiple hacker forums online have adopted a no ransomware market policy after increasing law enforcement activity against certain groups scared them, basically. This hasn't stopped actors from selling their wares on these same forums. They are now just using code speak to communicate with their customers. It's worth noting here that ransomware doesn't make up all of the cybercrime there is. There's a lot of different types of attacks, from financial ones, stealing banking information, stealing passwords and personal information, trying to spread spam, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of different types of attacks and lots of different types of motivations out there. And most of them don't bring the kind of attention that ransomware brings. So because of this, criminals looking to, continue their cybercrime activities without immense heat from law enforcement may begin to distance themselves even further from activities of bad guys asking for things like $35 million ransom payments. Here's a quick overview of some of the most popular families currently in the wild. There's Ryuk, which is the oldest of the families here. You might remember that from them attacking the LA Times, various hospitals in the United States, UK, and Germany, dozens of US schools, and a city in Florida. REvil is one of the most popular and talked about ransomware families of the last couple of years. It also goes by Soda no Kibi. They were responsible for stealing nearly a terabyte of data from law enforcement or for a law firm representing Donald Trump and Lady Gaga and Madonna, and they tried to sell it all online. However, the most recent big name attack was caused due to a bug in the Kaseya VSA software that led to the infection of over 1,000 companies. Shortly after that attack, and after news about phone calls between the leaders of the US and Russia about what to do concerning this group, REvil's website went down. And that lasted for a couple months, actually. Unfortunately, it didn't stay long, and they're back with new versions of the ransomware appearing early in September. So over the last week or two, we've seen their websites pop back up, and then we've seen new versions of their malware being distributed. So REvil's back. Conti ransomware, which only showed up in 2020, but in June of 2021, the FBI announced that Conti was responsible for more than 400 cyber attacks against organizations worldwide. It also specifically targeted at least 16 US first responder and healthcare networks. And this is going to be a trend that we'll talk about more in a second. So Egregor, which has been around since September of last year, attacked organizations like Kmart, the Vancouver Metro Systems, Barnes & Noble, Ubisoft, Crytek, and demands an average of about $390,000. Excuse me. So Wasted Locker is a new player. However, it is controlled by the notorious hacking group Evil Corp, who created dangerous banking malware families like Dridex. And finally, DarkSide made a huge splash when it figured it was fingered as the ransomware responsible for the Colonial Pipeline breach of May 2021. In July, however, a new family named Black Matter showed up on the scene, and analysts believe that this new ransomware is just a rebranding of DarkSide, likely with the same actors behind it. So now that we've talked a little bit about the highlights and we've talked about the families, how are they doing this? You know, what's the most dangerous stuff we're seeing these ransomware groups do today? So first of all, let's talk about RDP, brute force, and vulnerabilities. Attackers have actually been focused on insecure RDP ports, brute forcing them when there isn't anything stopping failed login attempts. The number of RDP ports exposed to the open internet went from 3 to 4.5 million in January of 2020. In fact, in 2020, Malwarebytes began detecting our RDP brute force and failed login attempts just because of how often we were observing that attack being used to breach corporate networks. Cobalt Strike, which is, as I mentioned, a commercial full-featured penetration testing tool, which bills itself as an adversary simulation software designed to execute targeted attacks and emulate the post-exploitation actions of advanced threat actors. Attackers are deploying Cobalt Strike to map out vulnerabilities on a network they have infected, allowing for much faster lateral movement. We've seen cases again and again over the last year of like an RDP compromise or a brute force or some other exploit or a phishing attack that gives attackers access at least to the essential servers, domain controllers, things like that. And that's where they like to deploy Cobalt Strike to help them map out the rest of the network. What other vulnerabilities are out there that can be leveraged, and how fast they can spread. So it really, really increases their lateral movement. Speaking of which, I mean, if you want to do a company-wide attack, you need to hop on every endpoint you can and try to infect it. And once infection of the majority of endpoints is complete, ransomware is launched and hits the organization all at once versus infecting systems one at a time. And so that's a scary problem. And then finding vulnerabilities, huge vulnerabilities like zero logon or the, new print nightmare. They give attackers domain administrator access or, remote code execution capability, and are quickly being added to a lot of criminal arsenals. So the overall concern here is that ransomware dwell time is going to shrink as it becomes easier for attacks to spread. So we're talking about all the attacks. Now, what are they doing with that data? Well, double extortion is a huge problem. Attackers set up auction sites where nefarious groups can bid on data stolen from certain ransomware victims, depending on the organization being attacked. This might be no big deal, or this could be a huge disaster. And while many ransomware families have learned how to target and destroy software backups, it's still one of the best ways to avoid paying the ransom. By extorting victims through threats to leak data, the victim has fewer options, if any at all. So, you can have backups, but if those backups have sensitive information and that information was also stolen and is now going to be released online, I mean, that's a whole another issue you have to deal with. And that's a new, it's a new problem that, that you have to try to overcome. So the actual process of threatening to publish data turns out to be more lucrative in many cases than traditional ransomware. The creators of REvil mentioned that this method proved to be so lucrative that they now make more money from not publishing stolen data than from decrypting ransom. 1 in 3 victims are currently willing to pay a ransom to prevent the leaking of company data. It could be the next step in ransomware business. And you know what? It probably will be. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. So here's a screenshot of the REvil auction site where criminals sell off stolen data from their ransom victims. It's just one example of the name and shame site created by ransomware groups to threaten the release of private data if ransom isn't paid. It's really the second part of double extortion. And you may have seen a lot of different sites like this out there. I mean, there are some of them that say, yeah, we're gonna auction this off. There's some that say, here's just our latest victim and here's the crap we have on them. There are all kinds of different ones, but the whole point of it being, at the end of the day, a method of intimidation. So now that we've given an overview of the state of ransomware, let's answer the question, how bad could it be? So there are potentially 2 damaging factors in a ransomware attack. The first is the criminal pushing the ransomware on the network, obviously. But the second is how the organization reacts to the ransomware attack. The worst case scenario is that a ransomware attack occurs, bypassing your outward facing security tools and causing mass panic and configuration or confusion within an organization, which results in greater damage by the ransomware and greater disruption to the organization. And this leads to a much slower and more expensive recovery operation. So despite this being the worst case, it's also one of the more common ones we see these days. Attacks like this can lead to stories such as the city of Baltimore, who ended up paying over $18 million to restore their services for a ransomware attack that demanded less than $80,000. The main reason for that, they were unprepared. They weren't ready for it and they didn't know how to respond. So let's talk a little bit about the secret truth of ransomware. What do they know? What do we know? What do they know that we know? First of all, the attackers, they know that the cost of recovery against a ransomware attack can sometimes be greater than the ransom demand itself. They know that the kind of damage a public ransomware attack can do to an organization's reputation and trust for their customers can be devastating to the organization itself. And they know that a lot of organizations put security on a lower tier of importance, which means less security to break through for the attackers. Now, these aren't anything to say that it's any of our problems that these things exist. It just is the way, it is what it is. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses will put their resources and funds into the development of efficiency, of getting the job done, of making more money, and security takes a back burner. And this happens all over the world for all organizations, it seems like, Excuse me. So what do the criminals not want you to know? Well, the more prepared you are for an attack, the less leverage an attacker can have on you. Excuse me. A lot of what makes ransomware so scary, and it has over the decade, is the threat. The actual threat of the ransomware itself. There was a campaign many years ago, and it probably still happens every once in a while. But you would visit a malicious website, and the only thing it did was just launch a script, and that script would show a little pop-up saying, you've been hit with ransomware, your system's infected, your files are being encrypted, pay us money, call this number, blah, 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 blah. And obviously it was baloney because it was just like a JavaScript, and it wasn't encrypting anything. It didn't have the ability to, but it was the fear and the knowledge that people are aware of ransomware, people are afraid of ransomware, that they were hoping to, lure in some people. So the more you know about this threat and the more you know about how to defend against it and recover from it, the less leverage they have. There's lots of ways to breach a network. It also often requires greater trust of users and network configuration built for business efficiency rather than security, like I mentioned, to successfully pull off a damaging ransomware attack. And this includes network misconfigurations, when user accounts have too many rights, when systems and services are unpatched or unprotected, and when the security team has only focused on stopping threats at the network border. The bad guys they want you to put all of your eggs into the prevention basket, because when they find new methods of attack, they're less likely to be stopped. And I'm pretty sure everyone here, hopefully, and maybe if you haven't, then congratulations, I'm glad you didn't deal with this, but I'm sure a lot of people have spent a lot of time developing, deploying, configuring their security for a particular avenue of entry just to be attacked in the back door or through some other method, or some stupid lack of authentication, or a user account that got out of control. So when your entire security focus is on prevention of an attack, you don't establish internal processes and controls to protect data, and you're playing directly into the hands of cyber criminals. So what we're going to be talking about in the next section is how to fill those gaps. Obviously prevention is incredibly important. It's your first line of defense. You need to deploy tools in order to stop threats that you don't recognize, anything that might get on the endpoint or on your servers. That is a given. All right. It's like looking both ways before you cross the street. Obviously, you're going to do it. I hope you do it. So based on the observed activity from the past, we can make an educated guess as to where the criminals are putting their money today. And we've seen this a couple times, here and there over the last few months. The pay or don't get paid. The next generation of ransomware attacks will be meant to disrupt money-making operations for organizations. For example, last year we saw Garmin attacked by ransomware, which disabled some of their services and likely lost the company a lot of money. Alternatively, the company Cognizant expects to lose between $40 and $70 million because of a ransomware attack. So their goal is going to be less about stealing your money and more about stopping you from making money. So by disrupting operations and preventing organizations from like I said, making money or offering services, the attack is both public and highly damaging and costly, as opposed to extortion, which is sometimes easy to sweep under the rug, or maybe it's not possible to actually get any money from an extortion attempt because there was diligent backups and a prepared victim. Ransom attacks today aren't what we dealt with 5 years ago. They're not what we dealt with 3 years ago. Criminals are learning what works and what doesn't, and are also not afraid to experiment with what forms of attack are most effective. Seeing criminals heading in the direction of disruption over extortion is a representation of that playing around, of that experimentation. And in some cases, it's going to be a serious payoff. The group behind our evil have even mused about starting a new distributed denial of service, or DDoS, offering that would flood servers with traffic, and if the attack was successful enough, result in enough intimidation that the victim is willing to pay for the attacks to stop. Now, I don't know if they actually rolled this out or not. I'm not sure if it would be that great of an offering, I suppose. I mean, DDoS attacks have been around forever, and we have lots and lots and lots of experience in our various ISPs and service providers on how to block and diffuse DDoS attacks. So it's a cool idea, but I think they need to work on it. So let's talk about the ransomware survival guide. Hopefully you guys are all enjoying your lunch if you're eating right now. I hope it's good. All right, so let's delve into some options that you have. One option is to put time and consideration into how to properly secure your internal network as well as your external network. Here's the thing though, there isn't an appliance that you can just install or plug in that prevents all the kinds of things a hacker could do to your internal network. Imagine that we're trying to protect vaults with all of your company data, but because of how the network is set up, we've only got one vault with both critical and non-critical data stored in it. And almost everyone in the company has access to it. Instead, the goal is to bake security into the design of the network with segmentation and proper user account controls. So imagine that instead of one vault, you're protecting a series of vaults, all hidden behind your big vault door, with paths and mazes and special access requirements. Using this analogy, imagine which vault security plan a cybercriminal would prefer to encounter. I promise you, the one with less doors is the one they would like to go through, because criminals are lazy most of the time, and they'll go after the low-hanging fruit. They'll go after whatever they can grab. If we make it easy for them, then that makes their day easy. But if we make it hard for them, even harder and more difficult, and you have to spend more time and attention on going after a particular target, you may not be worth it to the attacker, depending on what your organization may have to steal. So how do you do that? First, you'll need to do some network segmentation. Take inventory of your data and the most sensitive data, such as those that could cause serious damage to the company if leaked. So these things should be secured with more controls than other types of data. And this could take the form of rolling out a new file server or limiting access to data to only those who absolutely need it. And it will reduce the ease a criminal will have in gathering critical data by using hijacked user accounts. The file server can sit on a different but connected network that requires additional credentials to access, or maybe only a few endpoints can access it. And since the valuable data is harder to get to, it may demotivate the attacker and, like I said, leave with whatever scraps they can get. So this is just across the board, doing this, if you don't have something like this in play already, then I really think you should, because it not only is it going to increase your security, it's also likely going to increase, the organization within your network, and make it, a little more easier to deal with individual groups versus trying to give the right, permissions to everybody in the company. But in addition to keeping the data in a more secure location, being mindful of who has access is just as important. If everyone has access, then the security doesn't really exist, does it? So you need to identify key individuals who need to access, but still make it difficult for them to access said data without the proper authentication. Now, that's always going to be a huge problem between security and efficiency. There's like security, efficiency, and there was like another one, but I can't remember what it is right now, of a triangle where it's basically or privacy. Security, privacy, and efficiency. Three things that don't always work well together, unfortunately. So, that's something that we're going to have to take into consideration, and that's something that we have to work into our operations plans, how we're doing business, things like that. That's that's a big difference from just saying we have our business and we're thinking about how we do our business, and then we have security, which is more of a bubble around the business. And if something pops that bubble, then you're wide open. But what if the business was the bubble? What if you had security built into every process you could? And it may be inefficient at first, but I think that eventually, people would get used to it. You find the right controls, you find the easiest things to use. Don't give everyone a tiny key fob with a 12-digit number that they have to plug in. That's not going to make anything easier. But having, one-time pad, multi-factor authentication on a phone or some other, trusted device, that might be a good idea. So you can also, like I said, use multi-factor authentication. You can require authorization from additional parties before access is granted. You can limit what the employee can do with the data or where they can even take it. I used to work at the NSA for a few years, and so this is all coming back to me. I think about all the requirements on accessing certain types of data, on printing things out, on leaving the SCIF, on classifying it correctly, all that kind of stuff that at the time when I was like 21 was so boring. But in my 30s now, I'm like, wow, that was so important to do. I'm glad we did that. It didn't always go correctly. Sometimes things got messed up, misclassified. I mean, you've heard the news. But nonetheless, it was a great way to make sure that only people who needed to see something got to see it. You can also assign a data custodian for some of you with more sensitive stuff, certain types of files, customer information, product information, recipes, whatever. You can limit access to that data to only a couple of people, or even an automated request system that is secured and can't be tampered with, who then can pass it on to the people who need it. Now, that's another thing that slows things down even more But if you've got the need for it and you've got the resources for it, why not? This reduces the amount of user accounts who have access to where the data is stored, but it doesn't reduce access to the data by those who need it, other than just making it a little more difficult for them. Now, there are tools out there that allow for remote monitoring of the security of endpoints. And if you identify a possible infection, you can quickly isolate the suspected system and run a scan. Alternatively, if you do identify an infection, you can quickly isolate uninfected systems too. You can also schedule regular scans and updates to keep endpoints empowered in protecting their users. Because like I said before, I talked about how putting all your eggs in the basket of prevention isn't a great idea, but you still need those eggs in your basket. You still need that prevention component, because that is just the same as ensuring that you've got correct data segmentation, or that you've got the correct amount of configured services or multi-factor authentication requirements, things like that. Those are all fantastic, and those are all going to help a lot, especially if something does get through your defenses. But you still need that outer defense, because it is, like I said, your first line of defense. Your endpoints, your endpoint security software, and your employees see most of the threats before you ever will. So next, we're going to talk about a recovery plan. And this is a document created and frequently updated to ensure all proper activities are taken in response to a malware attack. I hope that every organization here already has one of these or something like it. And you may have a plan in place for what to do if the building's on fire. You might have a plan on what to do if there's a flood or there's some other serious problem with the organization. So you got to make the same kind of plan, but for cyber attacks, and specifically ransomware. You need an initial what to do if I see malware checklist that all employees should be aware of and aware of how to reference. And that ensures protection operations are done to reduce the damage done by the attack. And so what I mean by that is that an attack occurs, and what do you do first? If the question is, an employee sees a ransom screen on their screen suddenly, what are they going to do? Are they going to just sit there? Are they going to turn it off? Are they going to flip out? Who are they going to talk to? Are they just going to sit there screaming until somebody shows up? Who knows? Whatever your company plan is, that's what you have to do. And making sure that people know, oh, I see something weird going on here. Here's who I call. Here's who I talk to. Here's the first steps I need to make. I need to back away from the system. Don't touch it. You need to preserve evidence, and you need to contact someone who can take it from there. So you need a call sheet. So whomever identifies the threat can quickly inform key members of the company who can prevent further damage as well. Not just IT staff, but, the executive suite, various other teams. Or if you need to contact law enforcement or a cybersecurity or insurance vendor for next steps, those numbers should also be on there as well. A lot of organizations, these days especially, have some kind of insurance or security, dedicated security team or something. And you need to be able to reach out to those people quickly, say, hey, this is what happened. What do I do next? And they can help you from there. So it's all about timing. These same actions would have happened inevitably, but it could have taken multiple days. Instead, we're looking at maybe, a couple hours, hopefully. And you need to have, policies set in place before you have to consider them, honestly, because they will take time if you do not have, that you don't have, to figure them out. For instance, do we pay ransom? What systems should have the highest priority in recovery? What are the operations required to restore backups? Not just who to call, but, what to do next and how to get things back up and running. One story I have about how things can go really bad concerning an organization that was not prepared for a ransomware attack. This was a hospital in Germany, and I'm sure some of you have already heard this, but the Dusseldorf University Hospital in Germany was attacked by a ransomware group. I don't remember which one exactly. They did it by accident. These guys were targeting the university itself, but instead breached the network or the hospital of the university hospital network, and then launched ransomware on that network, which shut down basically all their operations. They couldn't do much of anything. And so at the same time that this was going on, a woman who had had a cardiac event, was on her way to the hospital. They turned her away. They said, we can't do anything. Our systems are down. We don't know what to do. You have to go to another hospital. It's like an hour away. And so she went to that hospital. They got her an ambulance and she went there, but unfortunately she didn't make it to that hospital. And like, that's the worst case scenario, in my opinion, is somebody dies, from a ransomware attack, is essentially. But regardless, even if that ransomware attack had occurred, if this hospital had a proper plan in place and had contingencies on how to receive or redirect patients or do whatever in case something like that happens, I mean, this was a cyber attack, but what if the power went out? What if the internet just went out? What if the building was on fire, or there was a tornado or something? Like, there's lots of different reasons why you should come up with a plan like this. So how can your organizations continue to operate even if the systems are down? Think about that right now. Hopefully you have an organization where you can do things like use pen and paper or use personal devices or something like that in order to get your work done. But you need to, have these policies rolled out anyway. What is your organization's policy on working from home? Obviously, after the pandemic, I'm sure it's very different from what it was before, but nonetheless, are you able to do your work from home? Is it too sensitive and you have to be inside of a SCIF for that? Or, is there some other way that you can accomplish this or a different site you can go to work at or whatever? All these things are really good information to think about before you have to think about them. So if you can answer these questions and make the document available to all necessary employees, as well as hopefully perform a few simulated attacks, you're going to have a lot easier time when it comes to recovery and be a lot more successful in your defense, saving a lot of time and money. At least, we expect it to be. So kind of to wrap this up, ransomware, it's not going anywhere. It's far too lucrative of an endeavor, at least for now, to abandon, okay? Every year that goes by, ransomware takes a slightly different form that creates a bigger headache for the rest of us. And at the end of the day, they're counting on us to make mistakes and to misconfigure our networks and to ignore our security enough to give them an in. So the goal here is to not give them that in, as much as you can. I think that the biggest takeaway from this entire talk, honestly, is the idea and the effort of seeing ransomware as almost like a force of nature, okay? We've seen them come through phishing, the basic ways, phishing, exploits, brute forcing, okay, fine. And now we're seeing ransomware coming through application or MSP, application update processes. We've seen ransomware, I think it was NotPetya, that came right after WannaCry, that attacked a Ukrainian accounting firm and was able to hijack their update process to spread their ransomware to all users of that software, most of which were in Ukraine, and that was the whole point. But regardless, I mean, that's a supply chain attack. What we saw with the Kaseya VSA attack, also a supply chain attack in one way or another. And we're seeing more and more of this. The criminals are less about putting up just more and more names on the side of their fighter jet. They want to be able to attack lots of people with limited effort. And that's what we're seeing, kind of them going in that direction as well. So if you do happen to get infected with ransomware, make sure that you communicate with local law enforcement. The information obtained from your case might help prevent future cases or take down the criminals behind the attack. I know a lot of, when I mentioned earlier in the presentation that law enforcement has taken down multiple families over the last year, a lot of that information and the data that they used and the intelligence they gathered in order to do these things was obtained from cases of people being hit by ransomware, and working with law enforcement to give them more information, give them help in some attribution, and it made a pretty big difference. So preparedness is the key here. And the point of this talk entirely If you expect a ransomware attack, you can modify your infrastructure, security, or operations to greatly reduce the downtime, damage, and cost from such an attack. And in the end, prevent your organization from being infected by most malware being spread today. So, this talk started as ransomware, and that's the main focus here. But you follow these tips, you follow these steps, you prepare your organization in such a way that an attack won't completely, disable it in some way, and you're going to be defended from a lot more than just ransomware. It's going to really empower your organization overall, increase your security, hopefully increase your operational capabilities and efficiency in the long run. We'll have to see. But that's it for me, folks. Thank you so much for listening. And I don't know if we have an option to do any questions or anything, but we'll just hang out for now.
Are there any questions in the audience? We're not seeing any questions on this end. Thank you very much, Adam, for taking your time to talk to us today.
Thank you, John. Thanks, guys. Great talking to you.